All right. So, to those who are here, we'll see a few people join over in the coming minutes. But Adam, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Happy to. Thanks.
So before we jump in, I would love if you could give just a super brief, like, who are you, what's your background, and then we can chat.
Sure. So I'm Adam Stoltz, and currently serve as the head of the consulting practice group at HOK, an architecture, interiors, and planning firm. I am based out of New York City, or the New York office, but work globally with our team. And the consulting group, and in fact, my background is rooted in understanding the wants and needs of people. I'm not a designer by training. I'm actually a social and behavioral psychologist with my master's in urban planning. So I think about the relationship between people and the built environment.
Cool. So I think we'd be remiss to jump into design without talking about what's going on in the world. And I thought maybe, you made this comment about how design and inclusivity and diversity are really important. Can you sort of tell me, like, how you think about inclusion and diversity at your company level? Like, just how you think about, like, building a diverse team and why that's important, and then we can talk about it from, like, a practical standpoint.
Sure. So without question, design firms and designers play a role in ensuring that space, both in terms of the way that it's provided and in access to it, is done with an eye towards equity and inclusion. And I think for us, and certainly for me, there are two components to that. One, as an organization, as a profession, we have to have diversity, right? Within, as we look across my colleagues and those in the design and design-related industries, that's certainly incredibly important. But the second thing is to understand, and this again from my role, we work to understand that people are different, have different backgrounds, come from different perspectives, have different wants and needs, and that spaces need to be designed with those differences in mind, whether we're talking about public spaces, cities, transportation systems, or even sort of stadiums and corporate workplaces.
Do you have an opinion on what you think is maybe the least, or where you would find the biggest outcomes or positive net benefits to making a more accessible or a better designed city? Is it public transit? Is it access to great internet in rural areas? Is it what in your opinion do you feel are sort of like low-hanging fruit in the event that you could just, like, snap your fingers and make changes?
Well, I think choice. I think enabling choice is an important component of any successful environment or series of environments, right? When you think about at a variety of scales, and these systems are absolutely intertwined.
Choice of what?
A choice of what spaces you're accessing, and when you're accessing them. So if we think about, say, even just the kinds of workplace conversations that we're having today, the idea of you having or not having an option, but to take a public transportation system, and go into a central business district in order to make your way to the office that is provided to you, or that you're told that you have to come to, may not work for all people. And so in many ways, recognizing that we have an opportunity, or that we must better understand the options that we can provide people so they can make the best informed decision for them, is what's important.
It's interesting, like there's this whole, and I realize that we may be straying from specifically, like, well, but perhaps this is, like, still urban planning, like micromobility and access to, like, personal electric vehicles of some sort that are like electric scooters or electric bicycles has totally changed the cost structure and freedom of movement for like low income or lower income. Because, like, right now, like, even in San Francisco where I live, BART is reopening and there's, like, a BART operator who came down with COVID. and it's like packed spaces. It's substantially harder to get people into the city where there are, a lot of people are working and they're not able to do this from home. A lot of jobs are hands-on. And so,
right. That's true.
Okay. So, your job was one thing pre-COVID. I imagine that your job is maybe the conversations, maybe your job's the same, but the conversations are slightly different post-COVID. Can you situate me? Like, what was the conversation? Who would you be talking to and working with pre-COVID? And like, what problems were they interested in? And then how did that change when the pandemic hit?
So you're right in that the people are the same, right? The people that we're talking to are the same. In fact, in many ways, the conversations that we're having are the same, if not very similar, but the mentality, the framework from which we're having those conversations has completely switched. In fact, sort of turned over on its head. And what I mean is that we've been for a number of years talking about and trying to justify or illustrate the benefits of flexibility, of choice, of control, particularly around sort of corporate workplace, how and where people work. And in many places, for the last 12 weeks, we've been forced into a condition of essentially a flexibility, of working from anywhere other than the office. And now it's a question or a discussion of bringing people back, of re-entry or reopening our workplaces. And now not justifying that people work elsewhere, but justifying whether or not they come back.
And what are you hearing? Are people going back? Are 30%, is the 30% of the workforce not going back? What is the reality versus what people, because the thing is like, I've heard this, someone made this really interesting comment that like the only experts in safety right now are grocery stores and essential businesses. And that everybody else talking about workplace experience and workplace design is mostly planning and guessing, because you don't have to practically apply these policies and methods and then see what works or doesn't work and then iterate on them. And so I'm curious, like, what's the reality versus like the perception? Are people going back? And knowledge workers, are they going back? And in what, is it 15% of the workforce, 20% of the workforce, half? What does it look like? Yeah.
So people are going back. Offices in many markets are reopening. What's important is, I believe, to start with the question of why. Why would you, if you're going to reopen your office that has been closed for some time, for what purpose would you reopen? What are your expectations, your goals and objectives in having that place? And candidly, that's not far from the kind of conversation that we were having 4 months ago. We would say, let's pretend you didn't have space at all. What is the purpose of having it in the first place? And then you can start to build the other conditions around it, what you put inside, how you allocate and use it, those kinds of things.
So practically speaking, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say one more thing, but but to be very clear, when it comes to safety, I wouldn't intend to mislead or misrepresent it. So I am not an expert in safety. In fact, as a design firm, we're very clear about working around and with guidance being provided on how to occupy in as safe a manner as possible in closed spaces, right? And so we're thinking about things like distancing and density, but candidly not plexiglass partitions and
maybe plant partitions.
Plant partitions.
Well, I've heard this interesting thing, like instead of doing plexiglass, you sort of you do biophilia, some type of like plant-based, whatever. That was a joke mostly.
No, I for sure. I mean, but I think frankly, anything that you can install or that an organization can put up, which doesn't give people a false sense of security or safety, right? So 2 people sitting 3 feet apart from each other with a plexiglass partition is not a recommended approach to occupancy right now.
Why not?
Because of the expectation that the virus is transmitted as a result of the intensity of opportunity for transmission and the duration of time that you give that transmission to take place. So if you and I are sitting 3 feet apart, the likelihood is that if I'm breathing, talking loudly into a phone, that particles could be transmitted over and above and around these systems that are put in place, even though it makes it feel like we're block.
Well, this is an interesting question, and also one, and I want to talk. We can sort of talk about a couple different things. Like one, I want to talk about liability, which we'll get back to in a second. But perception of safety seems to be just as important as actual safety, or at least they have to come together. Also, by the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to toss them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that I work them into the discussion. So please toss them in, and I can answer them live or ask them live. So, there's, can you make the place safe? Policies, cleaning, best practices, methods. And then there's like, can you convince employees that it's actually safe to, and we've covered this in other interviews, but it seems like the perception of safety is important. Are you saying that you don't think that it's as important as it seems? Or I guess like, why not have something that clearly says, well, they're behind plexiglass, so I feel better about going back into work?
I'm going to try to think about whether or not I really want to say this out loud. I'm not sure I care so much. Gosh,
I mean,
how people
ahead.
feel is not as important to me right now as to what we're actually providing. And so I would say to most, to most of our clients, and frankly, we have this conversation internally with many of our colleagues, the safest thing right now is, if you can continue to, as we think about the hierarchy of controls, if you can continue to create a condition that eliminates the potential transmission of a viral threat like COVID-19, do it. And the best way to do that is to keep people apart. So if you can continue to work from outside of the office, continue to do that. Absent that, if you need to be in the same place at the same time as others, focus on preserving or maintaining distance and reducing density, so that there are fewer people in that space at any given time.
I mean, having a hard position on this, I think, is a really helpful thing. I think oftentimes people sort of split the differences, like, well, maybe this, maybe that. Like, I don't want to make a recommendation, which sort of brings me to liability. You're a designer, if not by background, certainly by experience at this point, and
Right.
by trade. Where does liability begin and end for a corporation? You make a recommendation, and obviously, like, there's liability from the perspective of what is your liability with the recommendations, how much accountability do you have with your own recommendations. But more broadly, and I think what would be relevant for this crew that's listening is, what should a company expect from their own, like, what are they accountable for? And and I'm asking a lot of questions, and I apologize, but what should employees reasonably expect from their employer?
So no organization should go at this alone. So you've got to have people thinking about real estate and facilities and sort of workplace operations. You also have to be thinking about the beneficial role that your legal, HR, and frankly, even sort of information technology, IT team can have contributing to this conversation. So I'm not in a position to tell one of my clients what is going to make them safe. We're going to design around the guidance being provided by federal, state, local authorities and health agencies that are establishing the recommendations. And they really are just that. They are recommendations. There are very few sort of situations where, as you said, there are sort of firm lines that can or can't be or can't be sort of drawn or crossed.
So let's take a recommendation that you just made. So you have a recommendation, which is like, if you can stay home, stay home. Company goes, I'm going to take that recommendation. Makes a lot of sense. We're going to keep people at home if they can be home. Should the company then start thinking about paying for individual internet? Should they be responsible for the workstation that someone's using? Is it all mobile device management and BYOD? Like, where, in your opinion, again, you have full autonomy to make any change you want at the snap of you sort of have like what is that? Who's that character in Marvel superheroes? My point is, yeah, like what would you recommend in terms of like supporting people in that decision?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would recommend is to, as best you can, avoid decision making with bad information. And I think, to be honest, right now, I think we're in a position where companies could be making decisions with bad information right now, long-term decisions. And so we're encouraging people to try not to do that. And when I say bad information, I'm talking about, sort of either being ill-informed because the conditions or the guidance or the record is sort of too poorly understood or not clear enough or not firm enough.
Can you give me an example?
But also ill-timed. Well, so for example, around there is not universal, there is not strict guidance being provided about density. Many organizations are playing with, again, just thinking about distancing, occupying space, it's somewhere between 30 and 50%. But that's right now. There could be, and perhaps maybe should be, or will be phases of occupancy that look at how do we then continue? Yeah, how do we continue to occupy space in a series of moments or phases in between now and when we're back to, if you will, some sort of what looks like full occupancy or utilization of our spaces. So let's not try to make decisions today for the next 18 months when new information will continue to come out.
So decide not to decide.
Decide to only decide for so long.
Sure. Okay. Gotcha. That's great. There's an awesome book called Shogun that has like a whole like scene where it talks about deciding not to decide.
I like that.
There was another one that I was gonna ask. Are new capital projects on hold? Like you're responsible for 50 million square feet of space. I'm responsible for 50 million square feet of space. I call you Adam, and I'm like, Adam, I've got a global portfolio. I've got 35 leases that are coming up to expire towards the end of the year in different periods of time. I'm trying to figure out whether or not I renew, get rid of, stop new capital projects that are planned for 2021. Like, Sure. What do you advise?
Yeah. So within that portfolio, within that 50 million square feet of space, some portion of it is going to be very well tied to some kind of consistency in your business related to headcount or what you develop or deliver, or how you generate revenue. And so some portion of that is really quite reliable. I mean, save for something remarkably drastic and unforeseen happening to your business. And so in terms of capital projects, I would say that proportion of space should be planned, accommodated, used comfortably. There's another portion which should frankly be in fairly, short to mid-term kinds of occupancy strategies or solutions. And that might be highly geographically dependent. You might decide that you're actually going to have a lot of very small spaces or a few in a sort of hub and spoke model. And that's the sort of thing that we can plan for in a much shortened time frame. What do you need now and for the next 12, 18, 24 months? And then leave a bit within that portfolio, within that requirement for very short-term, unforeseen, maybe even no-term kinds of solutions. And so there we might be talking about things like co-working spaces or other kinds of sort of pop-up solutions, or frankly, even conditions that allow people to sort of work in a distributed manner.
Mm-hmm. So, shoot, you keep hitting on things that I want to talk about, and then I forget to like circle back on the thing.
Interrupt me.
No, it's good. So you were sort of talking about like co-working space and whether or not you sort of, I guess, like what percentage of the workforce goes back? Do you think it's going to be, and I mean, like, give me your opinion, not necessarily as like, you're not liable for this recommendation. I'm just curious, like, are we going to see, is safe 25% in September, October? Is it going to be 50%? And what do you expect to see from customers? What are you hearing from customers?
Yeah, I expect that initially. I think that many organizations are going, and let's just talk about corporate workplaces, right? That we're talking about companies going back and occupying to the order of 25 to 30% of staff. So if you have 100 people, 25 to 30 of them will come back to the office either full time or on a sort of regular basis throughout the week. It may not be full time, and the remaining proportion of those people initially will continue to work from home. that will start to change. It is a dance, right? And that's not sort of my description. But that idea of we're going to open some things up, relax, people are going to come in. And that's not just happening within one office. Right now, we're talking about multiplying that across thousands and thousands of right, offices in a given market or city. And then see what happens. See how, as companies, we react, see how people react. See, frankly, as we get through the summer, and now schools are making decisions about their approach to teaching and learning in the fall, whether or not workers have to make adjustments again, perhaps in a different way. Our point is just that for some people, just because you're working from home today doesn't mean you should work from home. There are some for whom it is not working very well at all. And those people need to be accommodated again. They need to be supported in order to do their best work.
Yeah. So let's talk about the design of space. There's a really good question about, like, as you think about long-term capital planning, previous approach was more density of people, more people in fewer square feet. Really good model for co-working, especially. Do you expect people to expand their real estate, use the same real estate? Are you going to get rid of shared spaces, have more shared spaces, and step up cleaning? What is the prevailing wisdom? And I know that I've heard arguments on both sides of this, but I would love your maybe strong opinion one way or the other. Like, what do you think is sort of in the best interest of safety as people come back?
Yeah. So I do believe that we had started to see a leveling on the pressures on square foot per person, right? So we recognized that we couldn't just cram more and more people into less and less space and have them accept that. And as a result, we go back to flexibility and choice. We started seeing the interest and adoption of people looking for outlets to go other places in order to accommodate work. That doesn't work for everyone, but for those that it did work for, they were taking advantage of those opportunities. When we look to the trajectory of the workplace, we very much assume that there will be a day when there is a vaccine. We do not need partitions. We are not wearing masks. We do not have concerns about being again within close proximity of one another.
Sure.
Because I just don't believe that that what we're living through right now is a sustainable model for occupancy. And so because of that, we think that one of the outcomes of this that will last and impact square foot per person is actually that we should assume that we will have more hybrid levels of, or hybrid models of participation and engagement in meetings, in activities, in town halls, in client meetings, for some time to come, for years and years.
You mean like some people in the same place, others distributed, none of this sort of like 95% of the team is co-located, and then you've got the 5% that are sort of considered sort of rejected individuals from the team that sort of are wandering around the world somewhere. Like work from home is not an afterthought, is what you're saying.
We've been joking recently. Joking may not be the right. We've been finding levity, right, in the historical practice of you run a workshop, you have a meeting, and then as you're about to wrap up, you say, "Oh, wait, Adam, you're on the phone. Anything you want to say before we wrap up?" And then I come off mute. And then I say something like, "Well, it's been kind of hard to hear over the last 65 minutes.
Sure.
But no, I think everything sounds good." And then the meeting ends, right? That is, those days are over.
Well, there's this interesting concept of like COVID as a change agent, pandemic as a change agent. And this is not to make, to diminish the parts of the economy that are getting crushed as a result of not being able to be in the same place.
Sure.
But, what are those things? What are things that you're seeing that you think are actual, like, accelerating in adoption that wouldn't have otherwise been adopted? I heard this great one from a bank around DocuSign getting approved in 48 hours. It was taking a year to get approval from legal. Like, what's changing? What can you now apply that you might have wanted to apply before, but couldn't?
Yeah, well, there are examples of requiring sort of paper documentation for things. And so I think, frankly, we're hearing a lot of sort of finance and accounting teams have quickly had to change processes and are doing so in very effective ways, not having nothing to do with the fact that they will or won't work in a distributed fashion in the future, but this idea of relying on paper, which we've been talking about for so many years, and digitizing processes that don't need to happen. Even another example, and this is a personal one, I needed a notary. And there are now allowances for digital notary services.
Notarize, yeah.
Yeah. And so again, that like, I get the stamp. I love seeing the stamp on the document, but that should very well be a digital process now. And it is today. I hope it stays.
Do you think that'll happen with voting at any point in our, I don't know, call it the next 15 years?
Not with any significant consistency.
So highly unlikely that we start to see distributed voting.
Highly unlikely. I think distributed voting is. I think we're more likely to see
vote by mail.
Vote by mail, and yeah.
Gotcha.
So I mean, I'd love, like, there are some countries that are held as being less than or not as advanced as the United States. And you vote by sticking, and after you vote, you stick your finger in a well of ink, right? That doesn't. Part of me feels like that's not such a bad thing. I will say one other thing that I do hope sticks, and that is that in many places, restaurants are allowed to sell alcohol as part of to-go packages, at least in New York. And I love when some of my local restaurants, like, I just love to grab one of their bottles of wine instead of one of mine. I hope that continues.
Yeah. So we're about a minute or so out from wrapping. These things go extremely fast. So I appreciate you kind of jumping in. Okay. What is the reality that no one's talking about? And I have a note from the last time I asked you this question, if you want to prompt, but like, what is the reality that you think no one is talking about?
Sure. Well, I think if I remember it, I think I talked about decision-making last time, or about making.
Waves of disruption was a thing that you made a note about.
Yeah,
it was like, it's not likely to be a linear emergence.
Right. Well,
yeah, go ahead.
And this goes to that idea of sort of making bad decisions based on time, right? And so the idea that you as an organization can make decisions for people and try to apply that over a situation that is changing by the week is just poor. It's not a good use of energy, effort, or frankly emotional capacity right now, or energy right now. So I would say we should expect that as we look ahead to the next 12 to 18 to 24 months, it's very likely that this is a condition where we are relaxing and contracting, or constricting, and then relaxing again, and then maybe relaxing further, but then constricting again. And so being able to be ready to accommodate that, put plans in place, and then lift them or relax them is incredibly important.
Since you can't make decisions, does that reduce the need for design firms' input or advisory services of any kind? Or are you seeing sort of an increase in help me work through this problem set?
I think there's an incredible role for partners, design firms and others, to play in making decisions. So it's not that you can't make decisions right now. It's that the decisions that you're making should be for a reasonable and sort of practical period of time. Make decisions for 3 months, reevaluate in September. Don't, or announce, as many companies have done, and I applaud them for it, that you won't make decisions until September, right? You're going to wait for information to come out. You're going to wait for conditions to level off a bit.
It seems like communication is like critically important, and the quality of your communication with your employees.
It is, and the companies that have done this most effectively and successfully are those that are saying, we are exploring, we do not have answers yet, but this is what we're in the middle of exploring. Telling someone that you don't have an answer yet is sometimes as, if not more important than just giving them the answer.
Yeah, that's excellent. So we're out of time, unfortunately, but if people want to learn more about your background or what you do, where's the best place for them to go?
Adam Stoltz at HOK.com would be the best place to say hello, get in touch. I say, if you can't get me through email, social media, or the phone, call my mom, because something is very, very wrong.
Gotcha. And one last question. I imagine that there's like a lot of documentation and maybe support or recommendations on how to do this well or safely. Is there a place that HOK has that you might recommend, or other outside resources that you would recommend people go take a look?
Yeah, look, I'll share with the audience here. HOK has a page on its website, Design for Change. Lots of resources that we have made available, accessible for everyone. Please go and take a look at those. I will commend our industry and many others associated with it, who are just sharing information, ideas. Sometimes that can be overwhelming. We get that. But Google search for those things, because they're out there, and I think we're all doing what we can to contribute.
That's great. Also, by the way, the pictures that your kids have drawn behind you are really spectacular. They should be artists. What are
Thank
those?
You. They are Britto drawings, or at least sort of frameworks for drawings. BRITTO. I'm in the attic, and it looked 12 weeks ago. It looked very different than what you see behind me, and they said, "Daddy, you cannot work in the midst of an unfinished storage space." So,
those are from your kids.
Yeah. This is all their
That's
coloring
awesome.
work. So
that's awesome. Well, thank you, Adam, so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you later, folks.